Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
The status update, but it looks like everyone's all smiles. Does that mean everyone is in a decent place today? How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm on the third corner of the frame. And so I'll be sewing that today, the third corner, because I've done the other three. And I was just trying my face inside the thingy.
How's it fitting?
It fits perfect, actually.
Wonderful. Good.
And so that's it inside. I don't know if you can kind of see it's inside the thing. And then I was just saying to Lynne that I heard somebody talk about cutting the little corners off your lining to fit inside to make the corners more. Well, Lynne said to make the corners more sort of cornered. I think. Yeah. Can't remember what you said, Lynne, but it was something like that. I'm misquoting Lynne very, very much here. And yeah, and then there's like it's once I've done the frame, the next stage is fitting in that, isn't it? The face and something about drawing a square back onto your face to make it a perfect rectangle or something.
That's right. If you haven't done so already, which you may have, I remember earlier we've kind of gone out of order because everyone's getting all of the guidance at the same time. We're not breaking off like we might in person where we're just speaking quietly, the two of us, and everyone's heard everything. I know some folks did that squaring, but it sounds like you have not. You have not yet. You've done the squaring of the rectangle on the face. Is that right?
There is a square. I mean, I do seem to have a line drawn around and you probably can't see it, but I do seem to have a line drawn around that looks like a perfect rectangle from the naked eye.
But generally that's done when taking the measurements that went onto the frame worksheet. So before you even measured, marked, and cut the frame, that's usually when that's done. Do you remember if you did it then?
Oh yes, because I had to make sure, that they fitted, that they matched with each other. Right. And I drew a so that's why that rectangle, that's where it's come from.
Yeah, you did that.
Already there.
Yeah.
Helping yourself in advance. That's great. I wish I was always so prudent.
So yes, I think I've got a feeling it's going to get a bit more tricky after the corners, but then I thought the corners were impossible.
You mean sewing the corners?
No, I think it's going to get a bit more tricky putting the face in, making that right. Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
And making sure, like putting the frame in and then the seam allowance, folding that back, and that's going to get a bit more tricky, isn't it?
There's some trick to it, but I don't think that's actually significant. I don't think that, no need to guard yourself at this phase for a significant challenge. I don't think. I think that it will be okay. It actually ends up moving pretty swiftly once basically the step you've just done, just to check everything fits. Once you have that done with all four corners, it's actually very natural to start folding those under, finding where everything fits and pinning. And then of course, by the time you're starting to sew, the pins are in place, you've made your decisions on where things will lay. So it moves pretty smoothly.
Right. Yes, I think I'll be all right step by step. I might ask for a bit more step-by-step guidance as I go along. Sure. Once I've done my corner.
Sure. Yeah, always feel free to double check, and who knows, maybe between Anne and I, you'll get the right response. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I was just thinking of all the challenges you've met already, Maria. The things that you thought you couldn't do and you've done them.
Well, I can't believe I've got this far, to be fair. Seemed impossible. It seemed like too much, and I was getting a headache right at the beginning, thinking I can't do this. It's a bit overwhelming. But with you all breaking it down as we've gone along, it's yeah, bit by bit, it's kind of come together. So it's teaching me a lot about not to get overwhelmed and about just to take the backward step and just take an overview and then just come forward again bit by bit. So I'm learning a lot in this process. About me as well, about what I'm like, how anxious I get and overwhelmed when, you know, it's just a case of just stepping back a bit.
Turning, what is it? Turning the mountain back into molehills is kind of how I've always thought of it. It's an important task.
Asking
for help.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, you know, even when it's silly, it seems silly to me, just asking. So,
but it's not. Yeah. If it was silly, someone wouldn't have even attempted to write out the instructions in the first place. You know, it's just, I think all the details would be too long it'd be a novel of instructions. So that's what Anne and I are here for.
Anne have done amazing following them instructions on the internet.
Well, that's part of what motivated me to kind of get part of this, is just to disambiguate some of the times where the sentence is a little unclear. It says, you know, it or that, when instead of saying the stitch or the fabric, it's, you know, so just clarifying some of those details is why I wanted to get involved.
Yeah, we've been buffered from those instructions somewhat.
Somewhat, but I think some of y'all have done well to follow them in between. Lynne, for example, I think has done well with using those to good benefit.
Yeah.
maybe doing it Lynne's way sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been looking at your photographs, you know, the photographs we put in of yours that are on the link tree, Lynne, and that's been helping, you know, just to look at your positioning and what you've done as well. And yeah, really helpful.
We're helping each other, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm on these tricky little squares still.
Okay.
And I've sewn one, and I kind of haven't sewn the others yet because I wanted to check whether or not I was doing it okay. So I don't know whether you can see the square.
Move it up.
Lift it a bit.
Looks like I'll just put you on spotlight a minute to.
Woohoo! There we go.
Oh yeah, that's clear.
Yeah, it looks good. The overhead lighting, I think, is accentuating some not flatness, but I think that if I'm looking at it correctly, it looks good. The corners are pretty tight. The stitching is a consistent distance around. The positioning is correct. So yeah, I'd say that is good. I can't see the individual stitches, so
no.
I trust your
probably just as well.
Okay.
I'll show you the back as well.
Okay.
So I don't know whether you can see. Oh, you might not be able to see it with the light there. It's rather bright, isn't it? I don't know whether you can see that.
It looks good.
Yeah,
I mean, all it looks like to me is a continuous line, a continuous square, which really with the back stitch is pretty close to what we would expect. So yeah, I think you've done well. If you do want like a close check, you can always take a photo with your phone and email it if you'd like. But from what I see here, I think you've done well.
Well, I had a couple of questions, John.
Okay.
One was I checked with Anne last week about the knotting process and the fact that you're not doing a knot. Are you doing the three? Well, we decided that we were doing the three overstitching things, but of course, what happens is you arrive at the same corner. So
what do you do then?
So what do you do then? Yes, do you sort of stop and do one? I mean, mine. I think I don't know whether you can see it. It kind of looks a bit obvious. It's there.
Oh, the little white bit.
Yeah.
I can see something, yeah. Is that, I
And
can't tell, it's not clear enough to me what I'm seeing there. Can you describe it? Is it?
well, it's the knot. Well, I went over on a stitch 3 times, and then when I got to there again, it was kind of they feel like they're a bit close together, really. I don't know how to do that in another way. And what I did was I did that so that it didn't go through to the other side.
Mm.
But I didn't know whether there was a way of doing it that was kind of tidier, less obvious, whatever the words are.
There may be. I think part of what I'm experiencing is I'm not perfectly clear on what exactly you did, but I do. Once you pointed it out, that was more apparent to me than I would have expected it to be.
Right.
That little corner.
Yeah.
So let me first pull out my Rakasu and see if I have something worth showing. I'm not entirely certain how I did it, but I did not do the overstitching.
Okay.
This was done, I did this during lockdown when I was working. Like you did things Lynne's way, I did some things John's way.
No surprise.
When Anne was describing it, was she talking about basically going in and then coming right back out and doing 3
Yeah.
stitches on that single stitch? Okay.
Yeah.
That is one way of doing it. The way that historically that I've actually done it would be similar but different. So I'm going to go all the way through. So pull it all the way through without starting a new stitch. And then, goodness, sorry, I'm moving.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm going to come up very near to where I went down. And I'm going to back stitch or stitch the exact reverse of the stitches I just stitched. And it may still wind up apparent because you will still end up with 3 stitches on that final stitch, and you can see there it's already more apparent.
Yeah.
But I wonder, then this is speculation, if it becomes less obvious if it's not just a single stitch in isolation, if it is 3 stitches instead, that it becomes, if it makes a little more sense in context. So let's experiment there, and you can make a decision based on the findings of our research. Why am I talking like this?
I don't know, but it's good.
I actually have a thought on why. I've been reading research on tomato grafting from universities, so I've been reading actual scientific research recently, so that's probably where this is coming from. So I've done 3 forward, and so then I now just will reverse again. The most challenging bit is making it so it's not super apparent on the back what I'm doing, and this one it looks like I missed a little bit, but if I just go in right there, I should come up roughly at the right starting point. I was a little sloppy, but back out just a tiny bit, and only catch that top layer of fabric. Okay, and then I can go forward again, and this is how I've done it. This is probably a little too combat ready, if you know what I mean. Like it's a little too, it might be over-engineered. I don't know another word for it in sewing language, but it may be more than is actually required. And of course, please do it with more care than I'm doing it now. And it may turn out better. But that is the process as I've done it. So very similar to the finishing 3 stitches. It's just, it also includes reversing.
Yes. Yeah.
So There's also
Is it
optionally,
going over 3 times with each stitch again, or just twice?
well, it's a total of 3. So I've 1, 2, 3 ends up with having 3 stitches, just because of you are required to, when you reverse, you have to make a stitch, at least doing it this way. One thing that you might try, and I think this would work for either the 1, 2, 3 stitch method or just the 3 in the same place method, you might attempt passing your needle, if you did not already do this, you might see if looping the thread around and kind of making a loop this way. So I passed my needle under the stitch. That maybe when pulled taut, it will pull the threads nearer together, minimizing. No, it is still somewhat apparent that there is more thread there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I have done, and I think, you know, for my next square, I'll have a think about it. Is I've got the, you know, the end stitch and the first stitch that are the anchor stitches, if you like, probably too close together, so it's ended up more of a like a little cluster.
I see. Okay.
So I think that I need to maybe just address that. I shall do another square, and then if I feel like it, I will, I will undo it.
Yeah.
I'm reluctant because they're not easy little things to do, are they?
And because the rest of
No.
it's so neat, isn't it? It's so neat and like.
But you know, I can see that knot, and on the other, it looks, and it's not a knot, but I can see the overstitch there. Whereas on the rest of the Rakasu, where I've done overstitches, like we've talked about,
So
they're not as obvious.
oh, it is obvious. Okay, because I was gonna say, knowing that I'm looking for it, this is the lower right corner of my Rakasu if you were looking at
Yeah,
me wearing it.
yeah,
And it's pretty obvious. Likewise, well, once you know what you're looking for,
yeah.
likewise, this is where the straps meet the face. You are advised to overstitch for strength explicitly in this step, and likewise, they are visually apparent. That said, you know, when you quote zoom out a bit, if this were hanging on my person, you know, how much scrutiny is that going to receive?
Well, I don't know.
Uh,
Can,
pro-
can can you show me the square there, John, that's under the strap?
yes. I think what I did here was I kind of went off script and I probably did some weird loop-de-loo business underneath like wrapping the
Right.
thread around. Um,
Yeah, because you haven't got anything there that's like an obvious ending stitch, the same as I have.
what's possible that I did, I might have buried a stitch where you make a single small knot and then you pull it through all the way through the fabric, but only through that top layer.
Right.
It's very possible that that's what I did, which I don't know. I should probably look at the instructions because I haven't looked at them for this step in a couple of days, a couple of weeks rather.
But the ones that we've got don't say anything about how to finish short, how to. They don't even mention the, you know, don't do a knot bit.
Yeah, I wonder.
When you do this 3 overstitch, you don't do a knot at the end then, that's the point of it, is it? You don't do a,
You don't do a knot, no.
because it could still come out, couldn't it, if it's just threaded through 3 times?
Yeah, but if it's over and over and then it
Yeah.
anchors it.
Yeah.
you can see where that knot landed. That's unsatisfyingly far from the where the end of the stitch will be. So I doubt this is what I did. I'm not particularly good at knotting. I've never been particularly good at knotting.
So the intention is for the knot to be closer to the material, so that you just a bit like doing a French. Well, I would call it a French knot.
I'm not familiar with the French knot by name.
Which is where you loop around the needle and then you just sew back into the material.
I'd have to see it. I'd have to see what you just described. Perhaps I can look at it on my phone. That may have been what I did. Actually, would be a French knot. But you can see the knot was small enough that I was able to pull it through.
Yeah. You've just done it. You've just done it with one circle around the needle.
Right. Yeah, and it's pretty secure.
Okay.
Aside from allowing all of that amount to pull through. That may have been what I did.
Right. So I'll have a little go with that.
Oh.
And see.
It appears.
Yeah.
I just used a knot.
You used a knot.
Yeah.
Well, I'd wondered that, and it. Anyway. Okay.
I don't. So the reason that we flatly cannot use knots over here is there are, in practice, there's only two layers, or there's only there's a right side and a front side and a back side.
Yeah.
And there isn't a layer from which I can hide a little knot that peeks out.
Yeah.
So the knot would be visible on this side. So I think that's the reasoning for using no knots at all here. But I wonder if, now that I know it's there, it is somewhat visible. What about my other ones? On this, I cannot find it at all.
But if you can do a knot that's sort of well hidden underneath the square and doesn't create a little lump somewhere, then you're probably okay, aren't you?
I think so, yes.
Mm.
My only remaining concern is that was my starting knot, perhaps. I am flabbergasted. I can't tell.
You've done them invisibly anyway.
Yes, but it's not. Well, what good is it if I can't teach it? If I cannot replicate. I think I see. That's, I think, a starting stitch there. So that means the finishing stitch should be proximate. I wish I had done these corners differently. I think the way that you proposed, Lynne, that's part of why I expressed interest in that. How did that work for you?
I think you want to see if they're quite. I don't know whether you can see that. I think they're reasonably neat. You can't. Perhaps you can. I don't know whether I can get it close enough for you to be able to see. If I stand it up a bit, they're quite. No, you probably can't see really. They're quite. There you can see that it's reasonably sharp. I think.
It looks sharp. Yeah. Does it have sort of that little rounded bit that can have if it's not fully tight? I don't know how to describe it, but it's a symmetrically round sort of curve.
Well, that's the other question that I have to myself is, have I gone close enough? On the corners with this square, have I gone quite close enough to the corner each time to really get the square really flat?
And you pressed it?
I mean, it's yeah. I think it's flat enough at the top, but I don't know whether it is at the bottom. So I think I'm probably going to end up redoing that square.
Which way are you going to redo it?
I think what I'll do is is see if I can do a knot that's really neat underneath, and then do the stitching a bit closer to the edge. You've got to get it really close to the edge, haven't you, to get it
flat, yeah.
To get it flat, and also a little bit closer on the corners, I think, if I can do. Yeah. You're looking at what it shows you.
I don't see evidence of overstitching in that photo.
No, so they must use knots. They haven't said don't use knots, so it's just kind of, and it doesn't look like there's overstitching, does it, at all?
No. I'm pulling up the digital version to see if it is more visible when not printed. I might do that. You can actually see that yellow is my color for clarification, to verify with other teachers, and it's not or no not, start, stop. So it looks like I have yet to come to an answer on this question. Maria, any more questions before a period of practice?
No, I'm okay for now. I was just enjoying that collaboration.
Okay, then we have something of an answer for you. So I think for now, an invisible stitch, or an invisible knot, meaning that single knot that you pull through and bury. That's what we're thinking that we should try for comparison. And I'm pretty confident that that will be satisfactory. I looked through I looked through 4 different Rakasu that we have here in addition to my own, so a total of 5, to see if there was any clear. Only one had overstitching. So I don't think overstitching was what we've generally been suggesting. There was a different style of overstitching. It was the one I described of going back.
Yeah.
So I do think that this is a good call. And I noticed, and this might partially be the skill of the sewist more than any reflection on the method itself, but the ones that did this method of completely folding over and then completely folding over and then doing that little quarter or like half fold, these were neater in appearance than the ones that did the traditional pocket fold.
Okay.
I think it's largely because of the scale.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if, with your experience, if this could not still be neat enough. So that's just food for thought on the method choice there. But I do think that the buried invisible knot.
The buried knot.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think if you want to try to get it very near to the fabric, don't do what I just demonstrated, where the knot ended up too far from the fabric. If you instead try to get it very near to the fabric, and then just have a very, very small visible stitch, that should be a safer approach. Well, you know this, I'm sure, with your experience.
Yeah. I'll have a go at that. Thank you.
If you would like to wait and not finish it and just leave a loose end, you can do that as well. We're going to send a question to the North American teachers and see what their opinion is. So we'll have some response next week.
Wow, I've started a quest.
Well, I'm going to rewrite these instructions, dang it. So I want to get it right. Let's do the best we can.
Okay, all right. Thank you
Sure.
for all that you've done and are doing.
Would y'all be interested in hearing an article titled "There Is No Author" by Judy Roitman from the most recent copy of BuddhaDharma magazine?
Yes, please.
Yeah, lovely.
I've already read it, and I don't think there's anything grossly inappropriate, and it's very interesting to think about, especially as a convert Buddhist in the West. It's been very interesting contextually for me.
Thank you.
A long time ago, at my first retreat at the Cambridge Zen Center, Zen Master Seung asked me a question. I couldn't answer it. In my second interview, he asked the same question. I knew the answer he wanted, but it felt fake, so I didn't give it. In the third interview, he asked the same question. I knew the answer he wanted, but I didn't give it, crying out, "That's your answer, not my answer." You'd think that, as a math professor, which I was at the time, I'd know better. Imagine a calculus student refusing to say that the derivative of sine x is cosine x because that's your answer, not my answer. But, of course, Zen could not possibly be like calculus. Having read Heshe and Watts and Kerouac and Ginsberg, I was convinced that Zen was about extreme individualism, that Zen masters were extreme iconoclasts, that the inner journey was exactly that, inner, isolated, the lone heroine attaining a cosmic vision that could shatter her world and make it whole. Now consider the rather anti-iconoclastic statement that, in my youth, I would never have imagined to have anything to do with Zen. Preaching of the Dharma depends on the examination of the ancients. Words are the shoots of this mind. How can you leave it up to your own conjectures and judgment? This is not an anti-Zen statement by some stuffy anti-Zen cleric. It was written by the great 16th century Korean master Sosan Kyejong, and is a self-referential commentary on the method of his manual of monastic training, still used today in Korean training temples, and known in this country under the titles Mirror of Zen, translated by the American monk Hyung-ga, and Handbook of Zen Practice, translated by John Jorgensen. Mirror of Zen has been a spiritual lodestar for me ever since it appeared in 2006. It's a slim book. I've easily read it over 20 times. But away from retreats, the semi-scholar in me was frustrated. Mirror of Zen is organized into very short chapters, many less than a page, each one supposedly beginning with a quote, followed by a usually brief commentary by So-san, and sometimes even a short poem by him. But the quotes aren't identified. I was told that nobody knew where they came from. Then, in 2015, John Jorgensen's Handbook of Zen version came out, and it turned out that nearly every phrase and every sentence, even the poems, came from somewhere else. The entire book was a collage. In some places, even the sentences were a composite of phrases lifted from one source or another, glued together and arranged. In other places, entire poems were simply slipped into the text. It gets worse. It turns out that this is in fact a basic technique for writing Buddhist texts, even the most influential and beloved, such as, for example, the Heart Sutra, which Jan Nadir describes as a mashup, going on to say that it is, in fact, standard Buddhist practice. Does this invalidate such texts? The sutras, reportedly 84,000 of them, but who's counting, are, according to tradition, mostly a record of dialogues among Shakyamuni Buddha, his disciples, and other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, unerringly remembered by his disciple Ananda, who dictated them to the assembly after Buddha's death. Their traditional claim to authority rests on their claim to this historical circumstance. The Heart Sutra is supposed to be a record of words actually spoken in the presence of the Buddha by the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara to the Buddha's disciple Shariputra. That's the story we're told. It is not supposed to be cobbled together from scattered phrases centuries later. The compelling evidence that the Heart Sutra was compiled by a Chinese monk who aggregated key lines and phrases from existing Chinese texts that may or may not have been translations of Sanskrit texts, and that the Sanskrit version of the Heart Sutra was in fact a back translation from Chinese, calls the sutra's authenticity into doubt. Or does it? The historical evidence indicates that, rather than being transcriptions of any Buddha's or Bodhisattva's words as dictated by Ananda, the sutras were written down centuries after the Buddha's death in either Sanskrit or Pali, neither of which the language the Buddha spoke. But the people who put them together did not make it all up. They did it, as Sosan, or perhaps his sources puts it, by the examination of the ancients. So why does this validate rather than invalidate the text? Words are the shoots. They die unless they are rooted. The texts are meant to embody a community's truths. They are not supposed to emanate from an individual's mind. They would have no validity otherwise. The tradition does not exactly change with time. Rather, it continually reinvents itself from earlier sources, like a really good sourdough starter passed down from generation to generation and added to over decades, the additions indistinguishable from their predecessors. Sources give rise to sources that cannot be pulled apart. It's not that this leads to that. This and that are not different. They echo, but it is simultaneous echo. You cannot really say first or second. To pull something like this off, you have to completely absorb the tradition you are in. It is not a matter of authorship. It is a matter of embodiment. In 1967, the French literary critic Roland Barthes penned an influential essay called The Death of the Author, in which he wrote, "The text is a tissue of quotations drawn from the innumerable centers of culture. The writer can only imitate a gesture that is always anterior, never original. His only power is to mix writings, to counter the ones with the others, in such a way as never to rest on any one of them." Here Barthes is speaking of anything anyone has ever written, from memoir to cookbook to, yes, Buddha's sutras. He is saying that you don't have to try to erase control or erase the self. According to him, nothing in individual rights is in fact written by an individual. There is no author. Everything we write, everything we say is drawn from innumerable sources. We don't own any of it. We only arrange it. We are embedded. Nobody works in isolation. Even the forest hermit, perhaps especially the forest hermit, has a context much larger than her own life. To believe there is an inner voice, an inner self, this delusion is the curse of the author, an author far more invasive than the author Barthes is talking about, the author who writes not words on a page, but the book of self. We think this is the normal human condition. We think there is an author. We think this author is us, and we believe everything the author writes. But guess what? There's no there there. The notion of self as collage, as particles temporarily glued together and coming apart, is basic to Buddhism. This is what the five skandhas are about. The notion of innumerable beings reflecting and being reflected by each other, this is Indra's net. The notion of the very nature of being as mixed, fluid, without boundaries, not resting on any one thing, this is codependent origination. A long time ago, I was on solo retreat when I suddenly felt possessed by a demon. The demon was inside me, looking out through my eyes. There was nothing flashy, no sensory hallucination, just a sudden realization. There is a demon inside me who has taken over and is looking out through my eyes. I was terrified. I promised myself that if I woke up the next morning with this demon inside me, I would check myself into a mental hospital. I kept up my practice. What else could I do? And then, suddenly, while doing walking meditation on my little porch, my view changing as I moved past one tree, then another, I realized nobody looks out through my eyes. The world comes in through them. The demon vanished. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Ding dong, the author is dead. Ding dong, there never was an author in the first place. And so, in my fourth interview on my first retreat, I suddenly realized this teacher is trying to teach me something. I should try to learn it. I gave the answer I knew he wanted, without worrying about whose answer it was. I stopped, if only for a moment, trying to write my own life. And that is from There Is No Author by Judy Roitman. It's 2017. We've got just a moment more. And I thought I would just quickly read one of my favorite stories, which I just happened to stumble, was already opened. I was just curious what was in here, but it's something short. And it's from Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, a collection of talks given by actually the Zen teacher that they were referring to in the previous story, from the Korean tradition, Sewn. Among the students of the great Zen master Ma-jo, there was a layman named Chang. This man was a very devout Buddhist who bowed and chanted sutras twice a day and paid frequent visits to the Zen master. He would always take along his little daughter Sul. The little girl was even more devout than her father. She would join him every day for bowing and chanting, and looked forward with the greatest pleasure to seeing the Zen master. One day, during a visit, Ma-jo said to her, "Since you are such a good girl, I will give you a present. My present is the words, Honsyeom Basal. You must repeat the Bodhisattva's name over and over, as much as you can. Then you will find great happiness." After they came home, Sul's father gave her a picture of the Bodhisattva to hang up on her wall. She spent many hours in front of it, chanting Honsyeom Bosal, Honsyeom Bosal. Gradually, she came to chant all day long, wherever she was, while she was sewing, while she was washing clothes, cooking, eating, playing, even while she was sleeping. Her parents were very proud of her. Several years passed, and her friends had long since concluded that Sul was a little crazy. This didn't affect her at all. She continued to chant all day long wherever she was. One day, she was washing clothes in the river, beating the dirt out of them with a stick. Suddenly, the great bell from Ma-jo's temple rang. The sound of the stick and the sound of the bell became one, and her mind opened. She was overwhelmed with joy. She felt as if the whole universe were dancing along with Honsyeom Bosal, who is none other than herself. She herself was Honsyeom Bosal, and Honsyeom Bosal was the earth, the sky, the great temple, the great bell from Ma-jo's temple, the dirty clothes which lay in a heap on the river bank. She came back home, weeping for joy, and never chanted Honsyeom Bosal again. During the next few days, her parents noticed a great change in her. Whereas before she had been a quiet, well-behaved little girl, she now would burst into wild laughter for no reason, have long conversations with trees or clouds, run down the road to the village at breakneck speed like a boy. Her father became so worried that he decided to peep in at her through the keyhole of her door to see what she was doing alone in her room. He looked in and first saw the picture of Honsyeom Bosal on the wall, and next to it her altar, where the Holy Lotus Sutra should have been, surrounded by incense and flowers. But today it wasn't there. Then he saw Sul, sitting in a corner, face to the wall, sitting on the Lotus Sutra. He could hardly believe his eyes. After a moment of shock, he burst into the room, shouting, "What do you think you're doing? Are you out of your mind? This is the Holy Scripture. Why are you sitting on it?" Sul smiled and said calmly, "Father, what is holy about it? It is Buddha's own words. It contains the greatest truths of Buddhism." Can the truth be contained in language? At this, Cheng began to realize that what had happened to his daughter was beyond his grasp. His anger turned into intense puzzlement. "Then where do you think the truth is?" "If I tried to explain," Sul said, "you wouldn't understand. Go ask Ma-jo and see what he says." So Cheng went and told Ma-jo the story of the past few days. After he had finished, he said, "Please, master, tell me, is my daughter crazy?" Ma-jo said, "Your daughter isn't crazy. You are crazy." "What should I do?" "Don't worry," Ma-jo said, and handed him a large rice paper calligraphy with the following inscription: "When you hear the wooden chicken crow in the evening, you will know the country where your mind was born. Outside my house, in the garden, the willow is green, the flower is red." Just put this up in your daughter's room and see what happens. Chang was now more confused than ever. He walked home like a man who had lost his direction. He could understand nothing. When Sul read the calligraphy on her wall, she simply nodded and said to herself, "Oh, the Zen master is also like this." Then she put the Lotus Sutra back on her altar, surrounded by incense and flowers. After more hard training, she went to see Majo at his temple. Zen master Ho-Am happened to be visiting Majo at the time, and the two masters invited Sul to sit down and join them for tea. After she had sat down and poured herself a cup of tea, Ho-Am said to Majo, "I hear that this young lady has been practicing very hard." Majo said nothing. Ho-Am turned to Sul and said, "I am going to test your mind." "All right." In the sutra it says, "The great Mount Sumeru fits into a mustard seed. Someone enters and breaks the rock to smithereens." What does this mean? Sul picked up her cup and threw it against the wall, where it smashed. Majo laughed and clapped his hands. "Very good, very good. Now I will test your mind." "All right." In Buddhism, the word karma is used often. You have good Buddhist karma, so I ask you, what is karma? Sul said, "Excuse me, but could you explain the question once more, please?" In all three vehicles of Buddhism, the concept of karma is used to make one sense or another. I am asking you precisely what karma means. Sul bowed to Majo and said, "Thank you," and then was silent. Majo smiled and said, "A very good trick. You understand." As Sul grew up, she always kept a perfectly clear mind. Outside, her actions were ordinary actions. Inside, her mind was the mind of a bodhisattva. Eventually, she married and raised a large, happy family, all of whom were devout Buddhists. Many people came to her for help and teacher. She was known as a great Zen master. One day, when she was an old woman, her granddaughter died. She cried bitterly during the funeral and kept crying back at home as the visitors filed past to offer their condolences. Everyone was shocked. Soon they were whispering. Finally, one of them came up to her and said, "You have attained the great enlightenment. You already understand there is neither life nor death. Why are you crying? Why is your granddaughter a hindrance to your clear mind?" Sul immediately stopped crying and said, "Do you understand how important my tears are? They are greater than all the sutras, all the words of the patriarchs, and all possible ceremonies. When my granddaughter hears me crying, she will enter nirvana." Then she shouted to all the visitors, "Do you understand this?" No one understood.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
Oh, you're welcome. See you soon on retreat.
I know, isn't that exciting?
Yeah, it's not long now, is it?
No. Brilliant.
Yeah.
All right,
Oh,
my love. Go
well,
well.
yeah,
Thank you.
you too. Lots of love.
Lots of love to you, love. Bye bye.